All good? Okay, thanks. Yeah, look, thanks very much and welcome to my playroom. Maybe next week we'll do the sitting room, we'll do the full tour of the house. No, look, it's great to be back. And this is an interesting topic. The online life of a child is something new, and it's something very new. And I guess from the point of view, as I've often said, I think we're in the middle of the biggest social experiment of our time. None of us really know whether our online technology relationship is a good or bad thing. For every piece of research that says it's good for learning and everything else, there's a piece of research that says it's maybe not so good for mood, anxiety, resilience, etc. But I suppose from the point of view of, and many of the questions maybe afterwards might be practical questions. So I'm going to try and think about it in a little bit. I want us to kind of move the lens out a little bit and think about it a little bit wider, because yes, of course, there will be children who will come across with kind of what will be described as kind of addictions to technology. And there's always the case of, and of course I've come across them, of parents having to remove fuses out of the fuse box at 3 in the morning to stop some sort of Call of Duty marathon, or, you know, children, you know, wanting to come back from holidays from Achill Island because the Wi-Fi isn't good, and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So there's of course those kind of thin end of the wedge issues, but there's a much more pervasive and insipid and less obvious impact that technology has on our lives. And I think as adults, you know, when we don't know what the outcome of something is, by definition, it's experiment. So we're kind of trying to find our way in it. But as adults, we can kind of consent to an experiment or not. Children don't have that luxury, and children, especially children now who are born into the technological world, it becomes a fabric of their being. It's not something. And people would say, when should you introduce your child to technology? Your child is introduced to technology from the day that they're born, because, you know, everything from the kind of baby monitor all the way out to social media, these are all forms of technology, and it's all part of the technology evolution. And I think from the point of view of how do we understand that, there is an issue that perhaps the easier something becomes, the harder the easy things appear. And if technology allows us to kind of cut corners and not ever to have to be bored and never have to wait and never have to, these are kind of important developmental milestones that children are not necessarily getting an opportunity to learn. And I think the cost of that is perhaps that we're seeing perhaps a lack of resilience, because children are expecting things of the world that technology allows us to do in terms of a very gratification-based world of technology, but real world and emotions aren't like that. They're messy, they're slow, they're up and down, and they're not, there's not an app for everything. And I think sometimes the realization of that for children can be difficult. So why is this happening? What people say, oh, I'm glad I didn't grow up now, because the world is so much more complex with social media and technology. But we have to ask a question about why. Why is that so difficult? And I think it is because of a number of things. I think the first thing is that I think technology can, when you're in the world of technology, you're in what's called a hyper-comparative culture. So the first thing is you are exposed to the showreel of other people's lives that we've never been exposed to before. So the idea that we can look into so much depth into both celebrities and friends and neighbors, into their lives, it's overexposure of information, and that offers us attention. It offers us a kind of a sense that we're not doing enough. And the hyper-comparative culture means that we will always compare ourselves to other people in the negative. And, you know, from the point of view of, I always tell this kind of story, but, you know, when I remember sitting, about 2 years ago, sitting at home and was watching Graham Norton, and, you know, sitting there with my wife and thinking, you know, this is nice. This is a nice point. You know, everyone's in bed. Nobody needed Calpol. This is a good thing. And then I went on my phone and found that 3 of my friends were on a golfing holiday in Marbella. And all of a sudden, my kind of nice moment was now, oh, why didn't the lads bring me or invite me to Marbella? And then kind of looking, and then I suppose I brought unhappiness into my life. Without checking my phone, I had enough. But when I went and checked my phone, it was no longer enough. And I think that's a real issue around that chasing the rainbow of desire. In terms of, if there's no enough, then there's no contentment. And if there's no contentment, there's no fulfillment. And so this chasing enough that doesn't exist, the technology world has kind of dispersed our concept of enough. The other thing is the tyranny of choice. And we see a lot more young people who are experiencing anxiety, and anxiety, I think, is the epidemic of this generation. And from the point of view of how does technology make us anxious? Well, from the point of view of the tyranny of choice is interesting, because if we're thinking about choice and we think maybe more choice, it helps us to reduce anxiety. It doesn't. More choice creates more anxiety, because the potential to make the wrong decision is much higher when you have more choices. So before, and I say this all the time, I used to, I watched Bosco, and if you're familiar with Bosco, it was a kids TV program in the 80s aimed from kind of 3 to 7-year-olds. But, I watched it till I was 12, not because I had some sort of developmental delay, but more because it was the only thing that was on. Whereas now I have Netflix and all this sort of stuff, and all I ever say is, I don't know what to watch. I don't know what to watch. And I think we've all been there, where we're scrolling through things saying, I must watch that. And someone in work told me to watch that. And we end up 45 minutes scrolling through and not watching anything. And the tyranny of choice is that the more choices we have, the more anxious we become. The third piece is that this is the first time we're living in what's called a prefigurative society. Everything before that we've ever experienced was usually handed down with experience and wisdom. So it was the old teaching the young. A prefigurative society is where the young are teaching the old. And that's the newest and most dynamic element about our relationship with technology. We are learning from other people. And, I meet families all the time and they say, oh, don't worry about us, Colman. We have all the parental controls set up and everything. Dara set them up. Dara is the 13-year-old. And from the point of view of the issue being that we are learning from children. And so if we're learning from younger people, then our relationship with it is going to be infantile. And it's not like we say, this is the motor car and it can get you from A to B, but you don't take it when you drink on board. Don't drive too fast. That's handing something down with wisdom and experience. What we're doing with technology is the young are teaching the old without the wisdom and experience. So yes, technology can be used for really important things and really makes our lives much more convenient, but it can also be used to kind of, I suppose, attract our lizard brain. And that's the kind of addiction model, where lots of the technology are designed to hack our psychology rather than to enhance it. And then the other issue is the illusion of control. And this is a real interesting one, because a lot of young people I would meet would say, and in my research, one young person said, I would rather search exhaustively in a company to find a website or to find an email address rather than making a call to see if there's a job opening, because the call would cause me too much anxiety. So the idea that we have this control over our communication makes us feel more in control of it, but it also creates more rumination. So we've all done it. You're writing that text message or that email and you're kind of going, oh no, that sounds too inflammatory, or that's too easy going, or that's too breezy, or whatever the case is. So you spend 20 minutes agonizing over a 2-sentence email. And again, that's not making life easier or making you more control. What it's doing is providing more and more space for rumination, and the idea that we have to be perfect and get it perfect. The other thing is that we're living in what's called an on-demand culture. So we're sold this idea of on-demand happiness. There's no encouragement in the online world to regulate, and regulation is the core task of childhood. So from the point of view of children, regulate their mood, their tantrums, their sleep, their appetite, their relationship. And the whole idea of the narrative around technology is things like binge watch, all you can eat data. It celebrates excess. So when you're trying to regulate in a world that's teaching you not to regulate, it becomes really, really difficult. And when we ask children to regulate themselves, they don't necessarily have the cognitive capacity to be able to do that. And so we're asking them to do something that even as adults, we would struggle to manage. And again, that idea of trying to regulate is that even if we cleaned up the internet and we took off all the pornography, we took away all the gambling, if we took away all the bullying, everything else, we would say, well, that would be fine. We'd have a clean internet. That wouldn't be fine, because you'd still have a 9-year-old who would watch 9 hours of YouTube of watching cats on skateboards. And again, nothing about that is illegal, nothing of is inappropriate, but that's not an issue of regulating content. That's an issue of regulating human desire. And what the technology is built to do is to create the sinkhole. So when, like, for example, in YouTube, the autoplay the next video, as soon as you watch something, then it'll give you something else to watch and something else to watch and something else to watch. So what essentially Google and Apple and all these companies they've created, they're the town planners of a village that we all inhabit. and our children inhabit it as well. But it's a village of desire. It's just built upon everything that we want. It's not built upon anything that we need. And if you imagine that there was a village that was just built on everything, the casinos and red light districts, and there would be no sanitation, there would be no disabled parking, there would be no street lights. The issue is it's just what you want, not what you need. And that's the world that the online world, that's the portal to that world that the online world offers. So when you have access to the online world, you have an access to that village of desire. And in order to be in there and manage that world correctly or safely, you have to be able to self-regulate. So you have to be able to say, I've had enough. And again, the idea that if you want donuts, the technology world will just keep giving you donuts. It's not going to say at any point, Colman, it's 5 o'clock in the evening, you've had 17 donuts, would you not try a glass of water? It's just going to keep giving me donuts. And that's the basis of the algorithm. And oftentimes what algorithms do is that they hack into our vulnerability. They hack into, and I'll give you an example of, I turned 40 about 3 years ago, and I was struggling a little bit with, an expanding midriff and everything else. And I remember looking through, I think it was Facebook at the time, and I found an ad for, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but I'll say it to you from the point of view of education. It was a slender tone belt. And for any of you that don't know what that is, it's this kind of thing you tie around your stomach and it sends a rather uncomfortable current through your stomach and gives you a lot of pain. But the ad said 6-pack abs in 6 weeks. And so that was the thing that sold me a little bit. Anyway, I went in, looked at it, didn't want it. It was 200 quid or something. So I came out of it. But ever since looking into that ad, all I got for months, and still getting them, were chiseled 24-year-old torsos selling me pre-workout drinks, post-workout drinks, and nothing about the algorithm was saying, look, ease up on the chiseled torsos. Colman's struggling a little bit with a midlife crisis. It was nothing to do with that. So the algorithm, again, will just keep giving us what we want and, rather than what we need, and will hijack the vulnerability. And if you think about that, if that's a young girl who's 11 and looking at losing weight, or looking at how do you self-harm, or how do you do it, the algorithm doesn't know it's an 11-year-old girl. It just sends her more and more of that detail. And so we need to really improve our own ability to be critical consumers of technology, and we need to teach children how to be critical consumers of technology. And that involves investing in a kind of a media literacy curriculum. And I would start that from junior infants, and I would really try and explain, much like the rules of the road, how technology is not neutral, how it is there to hack into us, and how to kind of counter that by having a degree of self-regulation. A curriculum that's fit for purpose needs to address the fantasy of the online expectation as well as the safety aspects. So the idea that expectation minus reality equals happiness, but technology just boosts our expectations that we should be this and we should be that, and we should never be bored, and we should never be sad, and we should never be, and all of that stuff. If that creates the expectation in you, then when your reality, which is your emotional life, is going to creep well behind that. And the gap between your expectation and reality is going to be indicative of your potential for anxiety, unhappiness, and disgruntlement. So what can we do? I mean, again, I think regulating content is probably futile. We need to work on regulating human desire, and we need to work on the humans. We need to work on the people using the technology. I don't know whether we're going to get buy-in from the tech companies to be safe, because I think from the point of view of the allure of the technology is its unlimitedness, and if you take that away, then does it have the same allure? I'm not entirely sure it does. But what we need to do as adults is we need to role model regulating our own desire. If you're telling your child to come off their device while you're on your phone the whole time, then that's like saying you have a bowl of porridge, I'm going to have a packet of crisps. It's not going to follow through. We need to teach children to be critical consumers of technology and teach them how to develop a healthy relationship with technology, much like the relationship with junk food. You don't say, when your child has a bowl of ice cream, the first thing they'll say when they're finished is more, and you'll say no, because a portion, you've had a bowl, that's enough, and you teach them how much is enough. We need to do the same thing with technology and almost encourage a kind of a diet of the meat and two veg of face-to-face communication, and the technology being the junk food of communication, if that makes sense. And it comes afterwards, and prioritizing technology within your family where it belongs is ideally where we should be. That has become much more challenging because with COVID lockdowns, and as we sit here today talking on the eve of lockdown 2, the hypocrisy of us telling teenagers and children, get off your screens and go outside. And for the next 6 weeks, we'll be telling them to come inside and go on their screens. That hypocrisy has not been lost on children and teenagers, and they see that we're speaking out of two sides of our mouth, and we have to be really careful about it. But I suppose when I look at the technology relationship, I think maybe over COVID and lockdown, we've had a bit more of a mature relationship with technology. We're using technology on our own terms. We're using it to talk to cocooning. Grandparents were using it to get the provision of services. We're using it for blended learning, etc. But it is, if nothing else, technology is fine, but it should never usurp that. And I think I'm providing therapy to people via the online technology. It's great that I'm able to do it, but it is no comparison to sitting in the room with somebody and feeling the emotion of somebody who is distressed or upset, or being able to reach out to it. It is it is a diluted version of that. And I think from the point of view of when we're working from home and the Zoom meetings and everything else, and I would say even in my own experience, I really miss the informalities of the kind of the ad hoc chat with somebody, or the expression where it doesn't become something that's overly kind of organized or overly kind of articulated, if that makes sense. The next thing is this a fad that's going to pass? And, will the technology, will we ever turn around and say, we're having enough? I don't know whether we will, but I hope we develop a more mature relationship with technology. But it is the consensus at the given moment. And where we're at now in terms of technology is that we are caught up in the romanticization of it. We think it's fantastic. But if you took a step back and think about the relationship we have with something like social media, it is a kind of a daft relationship. If an alien came down and said to you, can you explain Instagram to me? And you said, well, I take a picture of my lasagna and I share it with 600 people, and 75 people say nom, nom, nom back and whatever. The alien would go, I don't get it, from the point of view of that. And again, the consensus at the given moment, I would use this when talking to young people to say, I'm trying to make friends outside of Facebook by applying the same principles. Every day I walk down the street and tell passers-by what I've eaten, how I feel, what I did last night, what I'll do later. I show them pictures of my family, my dog, me standing beside landmarks, and I listen to their conversations and I give them the thumbs up and I tell them I like them. And it works. I already have 4 people following me, 3 guards and a psychiatrist. And I think from the point of view of that is that if we step back and look at the relationship we have with technology, it's kind of indefensible, but it is the way in which we have been inducted into it, is that it appeals to our what would be our lizard brain in terms of the easy stuff that can be picked off. And I might have said this before in one of the scheduled things, but one of the series, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's really important. The story is that a theology or philosophy professor comes into a classroom and he has a jar and he fills it full of rocks and he says, is it full? And they said yes. And then he gets pebbles, sprinkles them between the rocks, and he says, now is it full? And they said yes. And then he gets sand and sprinkles between the rocks and the pebbles, and he says, now is it full? And they said yes. And he said that represents a fulfilled and meaningful life. The rocks are the most important things, like your health, your family, your close and intimate friendships. The pebbles are the second most important things, like your work ethic, the job you have, whatever it might be. And the sand is the cosmetic rubbish, like how many people follow you or the social currency that you have in things that don't really matter. In order to feel fulfilled, you must put the rocks in first, then the pebbles, and then the sand. The problem with the online world is that it's selling us sand, sand, sand. And if we fill our jars up with sand, there's not going to be enough room for rocks and pebbles. So what I'm saying to you is, if you want your child to be resilient in the online world, get them really to focus on what are their rocks, what is their pebbles, and what is their sand. If they can prioritize that and prioritize that within their lives, that's what resilience is. Resilience is about not sweating the small stuff. But the world of technology and the world of social media and the world of pressure is telling us that the small stuff is the big stuff. And we, as the parents and the adults in the room, really need to be able to manage that as best we can, so that children see the world through a lens that is reflective of values as opposed to cosmetics. That's not easy, and it's certainly not going to be easy for the next 6 weeks or so. But just because we have to let things slip a little bit at the moment, and it's absolutely okay if it does, once this is over, we have to get it back. And I think that's probably the bit of a lesson that's going to be the greatest challenge for all of us, myself included. And look, I am a parent of 3 children, and I see the difficulty in trying to manage their relationship with technology. And I see how difficult it has been over lockdown, and not looking forward to how it's going to be over the next 6 weeks either. But look, we need to be as sensible and prepared and rational as we are. And if we have a good idea of our rock, our pebble, and our sand, hopefully our children will pick up on that. Hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colman. So we've got some questions now, and as you predicted, these are more the kind of practical questions. So I think that as a basis was really, really good to kind of get into these practicalities. So just first off then, what is the appropriate age for an iPad? How much supervision is required? Is 8 too young, especially for girls?
I think there's a difference between having their own iPad and using an iPad. So the idea of becoming adept at how to perhaps use the device would be best done if it's not their own. Again, it's the unsupervised level of access that's the issue. And again, when you're teaching a child to exist online, it is like the rules of the road. You'll walk with them, they'll hold your hand, then they'll walk with you, not hold your hand, and then you'll see how they're managing it. And as they show a level of responsibility, you're going to step back. So I would say, if a child is going to get a device of their own, I think 8 is too young. I genuinely do. I think that comes much later. But from the point of view of, I would start the supervision really, really tight and loosen as you go. So being online is not a human right, it's a responsibility. And the issue should be, as you show a responsibility, you get given the right, if that makes sense. So it's and the question might come up, at what age is the perfect age to give a child a phone? And I'm going to give a very unsatisfactory answer, but it depends on the child, because there are children out there who are 13 and would have no issues with their online involvement, that they're very sensible, have a lot of cop on, they're wise kids. There's 17-year-olds out there that I'd have grave concern about their maturity to manage the online world. And so age is a completely arbitrary issue. And, nobody decided that, 13 is the right age to give them a phone. In fact, Tesco decided that when they started advertising it, that you don't have to, it's hard to pick a confirmation name, but it's not hard to pick a phone. Or 3 are saying, how was your first day in secondary school? Here's your new phone. That's not recommended in terms of any sort of a guideline. That's an urban myth. Now, a lot of people would see the move to secondary school as the rites of passage, that a child should get the phone at that point. I think you must step them into the technology world a little bit before they have their own device. And certainly, again, having passwords and emails through everything, that you're being able to watch what they're doing, is not an invasion of their privacy. It's ensuring them to be safe. And again, we wouldn't send a child who's never left the house down to the shops first off. You'd bring them, you'd walk them, and then you'd show them how to do it properly. And when they show a level of sense and sensibility around that, then you might loosen the supervision. But remember, earn the responsibility to have the right. You don't give the right first.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question then, does screen time usually include TV, YouTube and gaming all together, or can you separate because TV isn't as bad?
You can separate it from the point of view, and I just would first say screen time is not a very good dashboard for your child's relationship with technology. It is much more important to look at time spent rather than time well spent other than time spent. So I'll give you an example. If I spent an hour on YouTube, and you can see the guitars here behind me, maybe I'm learning a song on a guitar and I'm using the YouTube video to learn that skill. That's a very good use of my time. It's a good use of an hour, and I've learned something, a new skill coming out of it. Let's imagine Anya uses her phone for an hour to go through Instagram and compare herself to all her friends and compare herself negatively and ends up feeling miserably about herself. That's a very bad use of her hour. But the screen time will just say an hour each. It won't differentiate what we were doing online. So we have to get away from screen time being a dashboard and move away from time spent to time well spent. So YouTube and television, watching an educational television program versus watching a mind-numbing cartoon, or watching a tuition video on YouTube versus watching somebody opening a box of toys, or watching someone playing a game. It's the quality of what they're doing and what they're engaging in that will develop their relationship. Now, the more kind of, I suppose, hook you in stuff is probably the more rubbishy stuff. And again, it appeals to our lizard brain. And that's the bit that we're probably, it's low hanging fruit from the point of view of attention economies. But what I'd say to you is, The TV is vastly different to technology for the purpose of technology's interactive. So there's somebody in terms of social media on the other side of the screen. That's not the case with TV. So TV is a passive medium which you're watching, whereas the interactiveness of social media is completely different because the quality of the interaction and the interface between two people is vastly different. So you can't compare the two. And, you know, people have said to me, oh, you're like De Valera when he said the telly is going to ruin life. I don't mean to be that way, but I'm saying to you is this is not the TV. The TV went through censorship. It went through things and said, okay, this at Watershed, there's some degree of structure to the TV releasing a passive medium. Technology is not like that. It is there is no ethical obligation in the online world to check out your age, your vulnerability, or anything like it. And that's the issue with supervision and surveillance. How responsible would your child be if they rumbled down the wrong street? How would they get out of it? And you make the call based on their ability to do that.
Okay, thank you. The next one then, my 12-year-old son has been told by his classmates that he's strange because he doesn't watch porn on his phone. How can I protect him from this?
Well, tell him his mates are wrong, I think, for a start. But I mean, I think from the point of view of, and again, pornography access is something we need to talk about, because I do think it is, it's probably a lot more plentiful in terms of at younger ages than we know or would like to admit. And again, the idea of the nature of pornography is the lack of realism to it. And if children are learning how intimacy or how to engage in relationships through the medium of pornography without having a concept of whether this is reality or fantasy, they are going to a very kind of skewed idea of relationships, but they're also going to be at risk of misadventure from the point of view of a misunderstanding. So the idea that, you know, there's nothing acceptable about allowing a child to watch pornography, because it has the potential to really have a disturbing effect and traumatize them. So from the idea of protecting your son from that is to continue doing what you're doing. And I'd say to all the parents out there, if you're the unpopular parent when it comes to technology, my guess is that time will prove you right. And I think from the point of view of the idea that, unfortunately, what happens is we follow the lowest common denominator when it comes to the first parent in 5th class to break and get the over 18s game. That creates pressure on everybody else in the class. And the pester power is, we're being kind of, oh, but Matty's mom lets him. And, you know, well, let's all follow Matty's mom. No, let's not. And in an ideal world, parents would have a kind of a WhatsApp group and say, look, there's a game coming down the line. We need to hold firm. It's not suitable. None of us break, and have a kind of an agreement prior to that. That tends to not happen, but we need to stop chasing the lowest common denominator. We need to, and again, you can't control your life. Like, prohibition doesn't work. It drives the technology underground. So it's not about not having any technology and kind of demonizing it, because your child won't be able to ever tell you about if they are online and struggling with it. So what I'd say to you is, go to your child tonight and say, whatever you come across online, whatever it be, cyberbullying, pornography, whatever, come to me and tell me about it. It won't mean that I'll take the device off you, because that's the biggest fear that children have, is that as soon as I tell mom that this is happening, she's going to take me off Roblox, or she's going to take me off this, or she's going to take me off that. And it's the fear of the device being taken that silences them. So give them that guarantee. Say, we will just talk it through. We will work a way to negotiate it, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to take it off you. And I think that will offer a child an opportunity to bring something to you, because when your child has an opportunity to do something online that they shouldn't, chances are you're not going to be there. So you have to be the voice in their head. And to this mom who's telling her child about the pornography issue, if she's the voice in his head, she's the sensible voice. She's the right voice. So she needs to keep talking the way she's talking.
Okay, thanks. And it's just interesting on that, Colman, this morning I was listening to some young people talking about their being online, and one of the reasons that they said that they didn't tell parents when they came across something was that the device would be taken off them. But the other reason was because when they told an adult, they were often, the first question they were asked was, well, what did you do wrong? So there's almost a blame being, so you must have gone somewhere where I told you not to, or you must have done something that you were told not to. So it's interesting that concept of children not coming to parents because the fear of the response that they're going to get from them.
But also the issue is, and I hear a lot of saying, my child would have no interest in looking for pornography. The pornography finds them. It's not about you going looking for it. It comes up in pop-ups and all these sorts of things. The technology is there. It's an attention economy. So basically the time on screen that people spend looking at the screen, that's the dashboard that they can charge for advertising revenue. So the companies will do everything to attract your gaze. It's an attention economy. If I can take 1% of your attention, that's worth billions of dollars to me. So the whole idea is to keep you on screen, to keep you watching, to keep you looking. And so there's no ethical rules around how to do that. And so the pop-ups and all this sort of stuff that can, they can hijack and be camouflaged in kids' YouTube or anything else. They're all penetratable from the point of view of that. And so if you're doing TikTok or Musical.ly or any of those things, you're not entirely sure that they're not able to be hijacked and taken by someone else. And so the child who's using it has to have the sense and sensibility about them to know when something's wrong and have that kind of sense. But I think that's a huge task for us to ask parents to do. And that's why I do think there's a multi-pronged approach here of government, communities, schools, parents, and technology companies to try and protect children. And just to say it's too difficult to do it isn't good enough, from the point of view of age verification, etc. But yeah, I do think media literacy as a subject, it would be something that we really need to think about. And I would be, having that conversation with people in transition year. They're already well in the technology world at that stage. So yeah, I'm talking about junior infants, senior infants. I think that's where we need to start it.
The next question then, we've removed all tablets and gaming from our 9-year-old as a consequence of bad attitude and behaviour. It's been a month. Would you recommend keeping it off limits indefinitely, or is some sort of access important?
Yeah, I mean, again, a month is a long time for a 9-year-old. Just to say that is a long time. And the value of that in terms of a learning might be lost in that. I mean, I think in terms of reintegrating him back is probably something that you need to kind of hit. Again, going back to the idea of self-regulation, a 9-year-old is not going to be very good at that. So you're going to have to teach him how to do it, and you're going to have to help him to do it. And so, trying to get him to re-engage with technology in a healthy way is better than prohibition from the point of view of, if he'll go to his friend's house and he'll get technology, or the technology, the Wi-Fi in McDonald's, whatever the case may be. And I know children who have 4 and 5 SIM cards and phones and everything else, and they hand the ones up for parents and all that sort of stuff. So the issue is that we need to be able to teach the child how to manage themselves in that world. And if he wasn't managing well before, he has to learn how to do that better the next time. And he's only 9. Look, we all made faux pas when we're 9 years of age. We all made them when we were 12. And we need to be taught how to not make it again, as opposed to just there needs to be learning in the sanction, if that makes sense. So I would do that. But one of the things I would say to parents, and many parents are very anxious about taking devices from children, because they'll say, oh, they'll lose it, they'll go mad, they'll, and I remember a parent years ago came to me, and her 14-year-old had done something she shouldn't have done, and mum took it off her for a fortnight. And the mum, for 2 weeks, a fortnight is a different thing, but she rang me after a week and she said, Colman, it's unbearable in the house. She's hissing at us, she's shouting at us, she's slamming doors, she's telling us we've ruined her life. Her smaller brothers and sisters are terrified of her. I think we're going to have to give it back to her. And I said, well, look, you said 2 weeks, so you might as well stick to it. And I didn't hear anything the second week, and I thought mum was giving it back. And then on the next week, when she came into the appointment, mum said, can I say something to you, Colman? She said, the second week I got my daughter back. She said, we talked in the car, we went to a Zumba class, and she even sat down and watched Dancing with the Stars on Sunday night. She said, I haven't seen that child since she was 11. And the idea that if we can get through the detox, there is something in the second week that allows us to do it. And again, when we see children taking up technology, there's something else that's not happening. And I'm always reminded of this one person who came to my talk a few years ago, and she was an older lady, and she was a grandparent, and she was attracted by the title of it was about online. And she said to me, and this is the thing, she said, we bought a swing in our house for the children, and they all used to go on the swing the whole time and have laughs and everything. And she said, they all got phones for Christmas. And she said the swing has never been used since. And I just thought it was this moment of, just as your child is gaining this kind of technological savvy, their brains haven't gotten bigger, and there hasn't been more hours in the day. There's something being lost in the technological gain. And I just think the emotional development is still so rife at that time that if we're skipping steps, we're missing important things. And boredom, frustration, being disappointed. These are all experiences that teach us. They teach us adversity, but technology says never be bored, never need to be, you'll always be entertained, and there's always somewhere where you can be, which doesn't mean that you have to be where it is. And if we see children turning to technology as a means of coping, it's no different to us saying there's the liquor cabinet, you know, when things get difficult, have at it. And so we need children to keep coming to us first, and rather than turning to the screen as a means of support.
Okay, thank you. Next question then, how do I equip my child to navigate online life? My child is autistic and uses it to decompress and regulate, but is prone to sensory overload.
Yeah, again, I think from the point of view having kind of firm structures around it, and again, as children are more able to regulate, and it's harder to do this with a plug-in device, but what I have seen work is if you give a child a device, like a handheld device, and say, you know, you have a full charge, but you're not going to be able to recharge that. You take the charge and say in 3 days time we'll recharge it, but you have to, so you're teaching them to manage their own usage in that sense, and saying, and it was like my mother used to say on Thursday night when she'd come home from the shop, and she'd say that the treats, when they're gone, they're gone. You know what I mean? You can have them all here Thursday night, but you'll have nothing on Saturday and Sunday. And so it kind of teaches you to kind of self-regulate. Now, with this boy's autistic needs, that may not be possible, and so I think for him it would be much more clarity and structured timetabled use around that. And of course there are benefits to technology from the point of view of communication, being able to link with friends, and lots of people would say I'm really socially anxious, but I can engage on the gaming front then more so than face to face, and it has opened up a whole load of opportunities for me, and that's really great. But at what point do you manage or to address the social anxiety issue if you rely solely on the gaming issue? So there's a dial at which the technology is helpful, and then there's a point in the dial where it's starting to become it's not moderate anymore. And if you're using technology to organize to go and meet your friends for a game of five-a-side football, you spend 5 minutes on the technology and 3 hours playing football. That's brilliant. But if you're leaving your friends after 5 minutes because you can't tolerate the social contact to spend 3 hours on technology, then that's where the dial has passed over. Does that make sense?
It does. Just finally then, Colman, I know you've referred to this before, but we've got quite a few queries in around is it okay to monitor their child's phone use? And I know you did briefly refer to it, but you might talk a little bit more about that just to finish up with.
Yeah, I think from the point of view, people are worried about infringing on privacy, and there's an issue between that. You earn the right to be trusted. And so from the point of view, I would always use the example of, you know, if your child wants to stay out till 10 o'clock in the summer and you want them in at 8, what you say to them is, come to me at 8 o'clock, 3 days on the trot, no arguments, no rows, on time, then I'll push it to 8:15. Then you come to me at 8:15, no arguments, no rows, no on time, we'll push it to 7:30. So you're saying to them, you earn the right to stay out longer by doing what you're supposed to do. And technology should be no different from the point of view of you're surveilling it tightly at the start. And when they show an ability to be able to manage things better, then step back, but not here's the device, have at it. Like, we don't say to a child, here's the 5-liter drum of ice cream, you know, have at it and come back to me when you vomit. What we say is this is a portion, and we need to do the very same with technology. And it's about them earning the right to have the responsibility of privacy. And, you know, if children are getting phones very young, there's no need for a 7, 8, 10, 12-year-old to have a private life of that description. Now, if you're checking your 17-year-old Snapchats, there might be an issue there, because you have to actually allow the child's development to have some privacy and to have something of their own lives. But from the point of view of, yeah, when you're starting out, start tight and loosen as you go.
Okay, that's great, Colman. So look, we'll have our last in the series next week, and that's about, let's talk about social savvy. So we hopefully will see all of you again next week. And again, just to let you know that Colman will be launching a new initiative next week. So we'll hear more about that as well. So thanks everybody for joining us again tonight, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you.